Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Remembering the anti-communist revolution of 1956, Hungarians took to the streets across Budapest. But instead of unity, the march exposed the massive rifts within the country's society, with Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and his rival, opposition leader Péter Magyar, gearing up for elections. The race is gaining intensity. Has Hungary's nationalist leader finally met an adversary who could end his long dominance on the nation's political scene? Joining us now is Jakub Jaraczewski, research coordinator at Democracy Reporting International. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Welcome and thank you very much for having me.
So let's briefly talk about the anniversary. How do the events of 1956 resonate within Hungarian society today?
The events of 1956 are one of the cornerstones of recent Hungarian history. An uprising, a revolt of Hungarian citizens against communist rule and against the role of the Soviet Union as the dominating force in the Central and Eastern European region. And the initial success of the revolt and then the brutal suppression of it by Hungarian government and by the Soviet forces has been a huge part of Hungarian history, and it has been remembered since through large demonstrations, marches and rallies held in Budapest.
Now, which of the political options today is more fitting to harness the sentiment that still lingers from those events, from the struggle against the communist Soviet oppression over Hungary, which only ended decades later? Nevertheless, 1956 was a very important part of that struggle. To what extent do you think are each side of the two sides of the political dispute in a way heirs to that tradition, and to what extent do they contradict it today?
So, as of current situation, the 1956 remembrance and the use of the sentiment poses something of a challenge for Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Orbán, who himself began his political career as a staunch anti-communist politician who would build support based on the criticism of the communist Hungarian government, and then on criticizing the continued legacy of the Soviet rule that began to emerge in Russia, has found himself in the recent years increasingly warming up to Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. And so the narrative and the way the remembrance of 1956 has been conducted by the Orban government has gradually shifted, with the Soviet-Russian element being increasingly downplayed and other elements taking its place. For example, the sentiment of the Orban government against the European Union, or recently against Ukraine. On the other hand, Péter Magyar, who leads the opposition party TISA and is now gaining in the polls, is trying to, in a way, return to the roots and to highlight the anti-establishment and anti... Hello?
Yes, we're back. Our connection was interrupted only briefly. Please do continue.
Yes, the sentiment was on the Péter Magyar side is that the current rallies express very much something similar to 1956, an attempt to speak out against an autocratic government, an attempt to bring change, an attempt to make Hungary go back to its citizens and serve them. So in a way, the roles have reversed, and the Orban government, which has shifted towards different narratives, is now facing an upstart who is trying to harness this original 1956 sentiment to his advantage.
Now, you've mentioned Viktor Orbán very often using this sort of sentiment against the European Union and also against Ukraine in the course of his speeches, of his narratives. Even during the demonstration taking place in Budapest, he actually said that we don't want to die for Ukraine. That was one of the major quotes there. And also that Ukraine, and I quote again, has long ceased to be sovereign, independent, and is absolutely not self-sufficient. Why do you think is there so much anti-Ukrainian sentiment there? Is it enough to actually, obscure other issues that people might be facing, like issues regarding the economy, unemployment, and so on? Does Viktor Orbán have reliable evidence that these narratives are so compelling as to continue driving voters to the polls?
I think that Viktor Orbán is trying to use this anti-Ukrainian sentiment to deflect attention from issues at home, issues such as the rising cost of living, the healthcare crisis, and other problems troubling Hungary. However, he's doing it in a rather smart way, because he also speaks to a certain common Hungarian sentiment of wanting to return to the great Hungary, the Hungary before 1920, when it was divided following the First World War. Back then, Hungary controlled part of today's Ukraine territory of Zakarpattia. And the narrative of rebuilding a huge country which will take back what was stolen reportedly from it by the post-World War I order is compelling for many, in particular conservative Hungarian voices. And so speaking about Ukraine lacking sovereignty and not being a real country, I read it as an attempt to build support towards a possible sentiment of Hungary at some point under Orban leadership being poised to take back some of its lands, including Ukrainian ones.
This revisionism in the 21st century in the European Union, is it not a bit of an outlier? I mean, in the vast majority of cases, countries which are part of NATO and the European Union do not really have such territorial disputes anymore. Of course, we have Turkey and Cyprus and situations like that. Wouldn't you say that this is not entirely a realistic prospect for Hungary, under any rule, to expect borders to shift so dramatically today?
Of course, I don't believe that the prospect of Ukraine falling apart as a country and its neighbors snatching up various parts of its territory is realistic. By the way, this narrative also in a way mirrors the narrative of Vladimir Putin and the Russian government, who continue to hint at an allege that, for example, Poland wants to take part of Ukrainian territory as well. So I don't think this is realistic, but nationalist governments frequently play up such sentiments. And we can also, as you mentioned, see it elsewhere in the region. We have the continuous territorial disputes between Greece and Turkey. We have the tensions in Western Balkans over unresolved territorial issues. And so this is a compelling narrative. And I think that Viktor Orbán knows his voters very well and knows that whenever he is able to play up the sentiment of returning lands to Hungary that were taken away from it, he will play this card.
So how strong is the sentiment running the other direction? You know, the idea among an increasing number of Hungarians that enough is enough, that they want change. Will this be enough to sustain these polls? Since obviously we're still a few months away from the actual elections, could this somehow become reversed by some unexpected turn of events, for example?
Of course, we are still half a year away from the elections in Hungary, and you should always expect the unexpected in politics. I think that the sentiments that are displayed by Péter Magyar certainly resonate with many Hungarian voters, and Magyar is smart to try to avoid the topics that Orban is trying to force into the discussion. His allies did not speak about the European Union and Ukraine. In fact, you could not see almost any EU or Ukrainian flags at Péter Magyar's rally. It were all Hungarian flags, and Magyar knows very well, I think, that he needs to speak to the conservative electorate as well. What struck me in Magyar's rally and his speeches was that he stuck a little bit more of inclusatory and conciliative tone, speaking about Hungarians need to speak together, they need to reach out across the aisle and shake hands with their opponents to build the country. I see it as an attempt after many months of very combative and very, I would say, aggressive rhetoric by Magyar to try to play a little bit into the card of national reconciliation and unity, and into the fact that even if TISA party were to win next year's elections, this will be a bitterly divided country where a significant support of people who will be opposing each other in a polarized society.
So one quick question we have about a minute. Do you think that Viktor Orbán actually had a major chance in the form of the contemplated summit between Trump and Putin? Of course, the summit is not taking place now. Do you think that this could have been the very last moment when he could have really turned things around?
I think that, again, a lot of things can change, and politics, especially in the region of Central and Eastern Europe, is prone to dramatic shifts sometimes, which we have seen on several occasions, such as in Romania recently. However, I think that indeed the fact that the proposed peace summit in Budapest between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump being taken off the schedule, that put a major damper on Orban's plan. The demonstration it was clearly crafted to be ostensibly a peace rally to bring peace in a troubled region. However, with the prospect of the summit being called off, that lost quite a lot of momentum.
Jakub Jaraczewski was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you very much.
And I'm Jonasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news, updates and commentary.